Hey, what's up, guys? Very excited about today's show. Justin Phan is going to be joining us to talk all things totals, win totals. Hopefully, find some good ones for you. Before we get into that, I want to remind you that our draft kit is now live. We're also selling the in-season package over at Establish a Run. If you buy the in-season package now, you'll get the draft kit for free. And Gallagher is slaving away, getting everything ready to go for the draft kit. We already have a ton of content in there, and we're continuing to add more and more. All right, let's get into it. Drew is going to be with us today, and Justin from Action Network and Fantasy Labs, one of the best NBA minds in the business. Justin, how you doing on this fine afternoon?
I'm good, man. Excited to get back into it. Talk some hoops. Best shape of my life. Put 10 pounds of muscle during the off season. We're looking to up the pace of the Anthony Davis locker room tweets on the Twitter account, and we're gonna take more threes, or tweet out more burning money tips. Whatever.
I'll tell you, man, since there was no offseason, all those reports are sorely lacking. So I'm glad we got one on you about being in the best shape of your life. Those things always make me very, very happy. Drew, I suspect you're not in the best shape of your life, but you're doing all right, yeah?
Yeah, no. Your suspicions are correct, Andrew. I'm nowhere near the best shape of my life. I woke up today with the back all locked up and feeling very, very old. So I am ready to grind through this NBA season. Just like LeBron, I don't intend to play much defense in the first half of the NBA season. Just going to be playing some offense, cherry picking down the floor, and trying to pad those stats.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of comments, most of them not very nice, but there is a consistent theme that I look much younger with my new buzz cut. So I got that going. I definitely don't feel any younger. I'm getting very little sleep with the baby, but we're pushing through. NBA starts in 2 weeks here. And Drew and I aren't exactly the sharpest bettors in the world. We don't have a ton of experience. I've been betting more now that I can bet in Colorado. Drew cannot bet in New York yet. And that's why we got Justin here, because he has been betting these win totals for many years, and he's sharing spreadsheets with us, and he's already up in our game. So I'm very excited to have a conversation. Justin, first of all, I don't know, how long have you been doing this? And maybe just talk a little bit about your approach when you're looking at the win totals.
Yeah, I think I've been doing this for, 5, 6 years now. And I think when I'm approaching win totals this season, it's just way different overall than I have any other season. And, it's basically the backdrop of the pandemic that we're in, and how it impacts the schedule, how we're evaluating teams, what's important, and even just with the schedule release, we're only getting the first half of the season. So I think previous seasons, the experience is somewhat valuable, but this is just an entirely different situation that requires a different approach.
Yeah, I mean, how much does not having the back half of the schedule impact things? Or is it, basically, we're definitely going to have a lot more uncertainty across the board. Is there any specific impact to not having that second half of the schedule?
I mean, it's tougher to really kind of pinpoint rest advantage games back to backs. Like, we only know the first half of the schedule, so we can only do the analysis for that part of it. And I wouldn't read too much into it just yet, because it's not really representative of the full season. So it's very possible that the NBA balances out for the second half. So teams with the most back to backs, or the fewest rest advantages in the first half, might have the fewest back to backs and the most rest advantage in the second half. And the NBA has been very thoughtful with the schedule, and they've already kind of taken measures to mitigate some of the impacts and account for other factors, like you see with the Lakers and the Heat. They're among the teams with the fewest back to backs. And none of the teams who have the most back-to-backs made the playoffs either. So yeah, traditionally, if you look at back-to-backs, the Lakers and Heat having the fewest back-to-back, that doesn't really mean much, because they just played the NBA Finals not too long ago. And the teams that have the most back-to-backs, they've been off for seemingly forever, since March. So it's kind of muted, I would say, the impacts of the schedule and the rest. And the way the schedule is set up, it's kind of these baseball style series too, against opponents in an effort to reduce travel. So like a road back to back this year is a little different than a road back to back in previous seasons. So if the Warriors are traveling to, say, New York, and they're playing the Knicks on Monday and the Knicks again on Tuesday, that's different than a road back to back traditionally, when they would travel to New York to play on Monday, then go to Boston for a game on Tuesday, right? They're trying to play these back-to-back series, baseball style series, in an effort to reduce the travel, and that lessens the impact of the rest and the schedule analysis too.
Justin, would you think, in terms of the pandemic, do you think already like leaning unders in general is probably a more profitable strategy long term than leaning overs, because the public wants to bet the overs more consistently? But do you think with the variance associated with the pandemic and how it could impact rosters substantially, is that something that you'd be adjusting in terms of your approach to unders and overs this year?
Yeah, I think you have to acknowledge there's just a lot more uncertainty this season. It's harder to really come in with these teams that have hefty win totals with a lot of confidence, because really anything can happen. There's way more variance than usual this season, and the league announced their protocols for when a player does test positive for COVID. So if a player does test positive for COVID, he's basically out at least 2 weeks. And that's assuming there's no complications. He's not showing symptoms anymore. So 2 weeks, that's, 7 to 8 games at the minimum. And we've already seen, the players, the first round of tests come back. There's 40 plus players that already tested positive. This is undoubtedly going to play a role in the season. And I think we have to factor that in to where we have to kind of embrace the variance and embrace the uncertainty. And that for me, we'll get into some totals I like later, and the under is kind of my approach early on.
Yeah, the first round of testing, that 8% of the people that got tested were positive, which is an alarmingly high number. I guess the only plus side of that is if everybody just gets it early and gets it out of the way, then there's less concern. One thing worth noting, though, that even if someone already had it and they have exposure to someone, they still have to quarantine. And I'm not entirely sure what the literature says on if you can transmit it after you've already had it, but they're going to err on the side of caution here. So it's not like if someone's had it, then these protocols don't apply to them. They also came out today, Adam Silver did in the NBA, and said that they are not going to let star players rest during nationally televised games. And that was something that I think the teams are already getting better about doing it, but something that they needed to address, especially with all the rest I think we're going to be seeing. So yeah, I mean, it's nice to see them to put that out there, just because it stinks when you're sitting down on a Thursday night to watch a good game and none of the good players are going. But yeah, I think across the board, it's just going to be a wild season. I mean, Drew, do you have any other high level thoughts as we've continued to talk about how COVID will impact things, just, at a macro level here?
Yeah, I think the thing that we have to kind of go in is with the assumption that we know it's going to impact things. We just don't know how that's going to play out. And, hopefully it's in a way that still leads to, a big enough sample in the regular season to kind of sort out the best teams from one another. I think we saw, with the bubble aspect, and who knows what they'll end up doing for the playoffs, if they'll have to go to like another bubble type concept again or different things. But we saw last year that, seeding didn't matter quite as much. It was just like, could you be fully, at full strength kind of going into the playoff situations? And I think teams will take that type of approach as well, which I think is another thing that when considering betting totals for the season is kind of trying to understand how you think teams are going to approach the season in terms of teams that are more concerned about trying to stack wins on top of one another, or teams that are more concerned about trying to develop players. And I think that's particularly interesting, especially on kind of the lower end of the total spectrum, with some of the teams that have really low numbers that you're trying to consider whether you want to go under or over them in terms of what their motivations and what their approaches are. I think most of the contending teams, with the exception of the Western Conference, like middle of the pack teams, are all going to be taking somewhat similar approaches, where it's just like, let us get in as healthy as we possibly can and kind of work from there. I think the Western Conference has more depth to it, so there will be more competing for the back end of those playoff spots. But I think ultimately there will be some separation during the course of the season that allows teams to really focus on just trying to be as healthy as they possibly can come playoff time.
Yeah, I think Drew nailed it in terms of, it's not a matter of if COVID will affect the season. It's a matter of to what extent. And for me, that really informs how I'm betting totals this season, just on a number of levels. So the first thing I'm really emphasizing is depth. This season is really going to be a battle of attrition between COVID and the condensed schedule, teams with the best benches will have a big advantage. I'm looking at teams like Atlanta, who initially, if this was a normal season, I'd be like, they kind of have way too much depth and they need to kind of consolidate a little bit. They have like Kevin Huerter might play like 20 minutes when they're fully strength, which is insane. Gallo's coming off the bench. Like they just have way too much depth. But that can actually be an advantage over the full course of a 72-game season with COVID and the condensed schedule. Other teams, maybe the Clippers, the Heat, so the depth is something that I'm really paying attention to because, there's just a lot more paths to stars missing games. Between injuries, between rest, between COVID. So that's one of the biggest things I'm looking for. The second thing I'm looking for is continuity. So this is a really shortened ramp up period. Group workouts only started, I think, on Sunday. Training camps open on December 1st, but players are only allowed to do like individual workouts for the first couple of days. So they're just really kind of getting their feet wet, and there's a bunch of players missing from camp already just because of COVID protocols. Some players decided to attend, little baby's birthday party and they have no idea where they are. Talking to you, James Harden. There's just not a lot of time for these teams to come in and gel, especially new faces, new players, new coaches, new systems, just a lot of things to accomplish over a short period of time. So teams like the Pacers, I think, have a really big advantage. So they're the only team, I believe, that are returning 100% of their rotation. Like literally every player that played a major role from like 1 to 12 is back this season for them. I think the Jazz are another one that stand out. So they brought pretty much everyone back, and they added D Faves, who's obviously played for Utah a while ago, is very familiar with playing in that system behind Rudy Gobert with those players. So continuity and depth are two things that I'm really emphasizing when evaluating teams this season, because of everything that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention, summer league for the rookies. And this is something that I think it played out as a bit of a mixed bag in the NFL. We were mostly shying away from rookies and guys that were changing teams. And there's been plenty of examples of guys that have done very well this season. But I think if you look back at the start of the season, maybe the first 4 or 5 games, a lot of teams were slowly ramping it up. And it was almost like a preseason, and the quality of play was down. So I think we'll see a lot of that as well. I mean, Drew, when you're going into drafts and such, I mean, do you think, are you going to approach it like you did with NFL, where maybe staying away from some of the guys that have changed teams or some of the rookies, or are you at least discounting them a little bit?
Certainly some of the rookies. I mean, it's a very difficult rookie class in general. It's a weaker rookie class, and the ability for players to make substantial impact early on, I think, is going to be pretty limited. So certainly on the rookie side, that's kind of my approach. Guys changing teams, I don't think it's as big of a deal in basketball in terms of their fantasy performances, just because in general, a lot of teams run somewhat similar stuff, and it's not like learning a whole new playbook in the NFL, which I think is a little bit more demanding. But I will say this, the thing that I've been thinking through more and more, and just how to try to deal with it in drafts for season-long stuff, is it more of an advantage to be drafting players that have had the long layoffs and maybe kind of chomping at the bit and ready to go than the players who are just kind of coming off? And I think it's been talked about in terms of the high profile guys like LeBron. His draft ADP has slid quite a bit, as there's been talk about him potentially resting and missing games. But I'm thinking about it in the context of some of the players who I don't think are going to rest and miss a bunch of games. But like an example would be like Karl Anthony Towns versus Nikola Jokic. Like Jokic played a lot of minutes during the playoffs. They played extended series, and he was out there a ton. And yes, he wasn't in the finals, but it wasn't that long ago that he was out on the floor a ton. And Karl Anthony Towns has not been on the floor for a long time. Cat's had to deal with a lot of other challenges in life, certainly during the course of the offseason with COVID really ravaging his family. But I'm thinking about it in the context of like, do I want players that have had more time off and more time to kind of be recharged and rejuvenate? Will there be a big advantage, especially early in the season, to those teams that didn't play in the bubble and had more time for their guys to kind of be well rested. Have you thought about that much, Justin, in terms of how you're approaching like DFS and things like that and minutes projections?
Yeah, I think probably the answer, and it's hard to have an exact answer. It's more of an educated guess. I would want someone in that sweet spot in the middle, right? Where they're not in that LeBron, Jimmy Butler, Adebayo, a Jokic, Tatum spectrum, and then also not in like the Karl Anthony Towns, Steph Curry, Bradley Beal, KD, Kyrie range, right? So you want someone ideally that played within the last 150 or so days, but didn't have to exert so much in the playoffs and play deep in. So maybe like a guy like CJ McCollum, Luka Doncic, John Morant, Devin Booker, those guys who are not too far removed from action, but they aren't, they didn't play an exceeding amount of minutes to where they could be fatigued and rested. So that's kind of my preliminary thoughts on that. I do definitely agree with you on the rookies though. So what's crazy is that a lot of these rookies, well, the vast majority of them haven't played in an actual game in almost 300 days. You have guys like James Wiseman who hasn't played in over 400 days. LaMelo hasn't played in like 388 days. And usually for rookies, that number is around 200. And they have, 100 plus days with the team, included in that, where they're playing summer league, they're around the team, they're participating, they're getting their feet wet, they're getting acclimated to their teammates and whatnot. So rookies, especially this year, exacerbated by a weak draft class, is like a huge stay away. And I mean, rookies in general aren't good. Their first year, they really show that improvement years 2 to 4, and that's going to be especially true this season. I think and from a betting perspective, I think any book that has LaMelo Ball like plus 250 or more, I would absolutely fire at that, because I think like just from a kind of projection standpoint, he's the only one I can really see that will step into a huge role.
The only guy that I think could maybe challenge is Killian Hayes. A lot of buzz on Killian Hayes in Detroit. But honestly, there's a lot of buzz around pretty much any guard eligible player in Detroit from the early press conferences. They're basically talking about playing 3-guard sets and playing these guys a lot. Obi Toppin was a guy that on draft night I thought could emerge, just because he's going to be a stat provider. Like he's going to be a guy that gets a lot of points and boards and does the things that people like, and he has the highlight reel dunks, and he's going to be in a market that people are paying attention to, whether they're good or bad, because we all pay attention to the Knicks regardless. But breaking Tom Thibodeau's rotation, I think, is going to be tough in a meaningful way for Obi Toppin, given his defensive limitations and given Tom Thibodeau's coaching tendencies.
Yeah, I like the Obi Toppin call, because basically Rookie of the Year is pretty simplistic in who wins. You basically add up points, rebounds, assists, averages, and that's who wins. It's just counting stats mostly. And Obi Toppin is like a Julius Randle type, where he's going to get you like almost a double-double. He'll challenge for that. I mean, he'll have the numbers. But you're totally right. Tibbs is going to be a tough one to solve for him initially.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into talking some totals here and see if we can pick out some that maybe we'll go over, maybe we'll go under. Let's start, the news of the day is James Harden. He's out in Vegas partying right now. It doesn't look good for the Rockets, and some of the things they're saying, it seems like they've been blindsided a bit by this. I mean, Justin, how viable is it just to assume that Harden will not be there? Because it sure doesn't look like it. And then bet the under. I mean, really, all you're betting on, it's like if he's there, I like the over. And if he's gone, I like the under. I mean, is it something that you would be interested in betting, or you just stay away from a situation like that?
Yeah, I think I'd dabble in the under for sure, just because he's incredibly valuable. The counterpoint is that they'd probably demand a huge package in return. We've seen some of the packages from Brooklyn being thrown out there. But also to play the other side of that, they don't have much leverage right now if he's just MIA and ghosting them. Like, they literally have no idea where he is and when he's coming, like right now. Like, it's insane. And there's a possibility he may not report. I honestly have no idea. So I think it's worth looking at the under there, just because he's just how immensely valuable. He's arguably the most valuable player in the league, just from on-court impact. So Yeah, I like dabbling there, and if that domino falls, then other dominoes might fall with it, and they might trade PJ Tucker or like other pieces when they finally kind of commit to that rebuild.
Yeah, I mean, they seem to back themselves in the corner a little bit. Yesterday, they were saying, "Oh yeah, I mean, he's gone, but we think he'll be here tonight." It's like, I don't know, and then he updates. There's more IG stories going around with him at clubs in Vegas. So, yikes.
The approach has been. I thought the approach today from Silas was really strange, given the approach that they've kind of taken in terms of being like, yeah, we certainly want to give time to let James simmer and like have like it was a very pro James approach until today.
Right.
They like turned on a dime today with the Silas quotes about like, it's really for him to say why he's not going to be here. We don't know when he's going to be here. And honestly, I think that's what James and his agent want. They want that antagonistic relationship to push the front office to feel like compelled that they have to do something quickly. And so if I'm in the front office in Houston, I got to be looking at Silas and be like, what are you doing? Like, this is not the way we intended to approach this thing. And I think it's really interesting, both in fantasy, season long, underdog drafts and different things, and in betting to try to take a stand on this situation, because I think we kind of know where he's going if he's gone, right? Like there's nowhere else that has really popped up other than this Brooklyn situation. I think Houston is certainly not happy with the package that Brooklyn is offering. And I think if Houston wants a total rebuild, what they want is they want a lot of high-end volume of picks. Brooklyn doesn't have a ton of that. What Brooklyn wants to do is unload all these like good, solid players, but those players are already paid. And right. Houston doesn't want to be paying all those guys for mediocre production. So I feel like they're stuck here. But I think like guys like LeVert and Dinwiddie probably undervalued a little bit in season long in terms of their ceiling, performances, because the way you have to project them now is modest roles. And so I think there's certainly, some stands that you can take out there, both in the season long and on the DFS side, underdog games and different things like that, on kind of picking a decision. Like, is this going to happen or is this not going to happen? I think Jared Allen would be another guy too, because I think Jared Allen would go in that type of deal as well. Right, Justin?
Yeah, he would. And he might play like 20, 22 minutes a game. I mean, they've been talking about extending him, but they have DeAndre Jordan there. They've been talking about Jeff Green, as this most best suited for a center role. So, I mean, I agree with you. Those are good kind of buy low spots. But on the other spectrum, you have Kyrie, you have KD, you have Harden. Like, are those guys you need to come down on, just given the possibility that all three of them might be playing together?
Yeah, I think so. And this is what we've been going back and forth on this, because Harden, from a projection standpoint, is like a clear number one in 8-cat and 9-cat leagues, and like trying to figure out what the right way to approach the projections are. And so we started to bake in some more games missed risk for Harden, but we haven't messed with the rates a ton, because if we mess with the rates, it impacts all the rates of the other Houston guys. And so like, how much risk do you bake in? It's just a really tricky circumstance. And so I was in an industry draft today that will air on Wednesday with Roto World. They did a live video draft that they're going to unleash on Wednesday. But I had the fourth pick and I ended up taking Jokic, and I was between like Jokic and Dame. And like, it's just, it's a tough thing to feel good, even though like these guys are great and incredible, but like the James quotes are a little frustrating. The Cat quotes are a little bit concerning, just in terms of like how invested he is in the season, and rightfully so with what he's had to go through. And so it's not quite as clear at the top as before, but yeah, I'd be dabbling in this Rockets under as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Cat quotes, I mean, that's another thing that I would latch onto a little bit. That total, I believe it's, let me see here.
It's pretty soft.
28.5.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of like the under there, because I think that team stinks. And if Cat is not going to be invested, I mean, basically they need him to play very well. And I don't know, maybe it's just reading too much into it, but clearly he's in an emotional spot. And I thought maybe it was a little hot anyway. I don't know. Justin, do you have any thoughts on the Timberwolves this season?
One more thing I want to add there with the Timberwolves is this whole kind of drama hanging over Malik Beasley.
Yeah, that too.
there's, the reporters fully expect the league to suspend him. It's just kind of a matter of how long he gets suspended. He's got the legal issues too. So he's a really important part of that team. And the drop off from him to Anthony Edwards is significant. I'm not talking any smack on Anthony Edwards, but we talked about how rookies are in year one, and especially given this situation where they don't have summer league, they're going to have very little time to, to get familiarized. So that's another kind of downside for them with Beasley. If he ends up missing some time, gets in legal trouble.
Yeah, well, I hope the best for Cat. I love watching him ball, and so hopefully he can get his head right and they can have a productive season. Let's talk about the Boston Celtics. That's one of the teams that you have highlighted, Justin, as a team that you like the under on. Obviously, Hayward is out. That's a pretty big loss, although to me it seems like a bigger loss for their postseason desires than the regular season. What is it about the Celtics that makes you want to take the under here?
So we got the Kemba news. He's out at least until January. He's not going to rush his way back. He's focusing on his long-term health. They lost Hayward, and I don't think adding Jeff Teague and Tristan Thompson is nearly enough to kind of offset that. Tristan Thompson's already dealing with a hamstring injury. He's going to miss the most of training camp, so he's going to come in, not 100%. And I talked about this earlier. Depth. Their bench is a huge question mark.
Terrible.
I mean, you look at their bench, it's either Tristan or Tice. You have Jeff Teague starting, so he's not off the bench anymore. So beyond that, you have so much inexperience and so many unproven players. Like, I thought Grant Williams did well in the playoffs. He was a pleasant surprise. But beyond that, it's Aaron Nesmith, Romeo Langford, Semi Ojeleye, Tremont Waters. We all love Robert Williams, but they have Tristan Thompson and Daniel Tice there. So he doesn't have a great path to minutes. So that bench, especially the backcourt depth, is a huge question mark. And it puts an enormous strain on Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. There's very little margin for error. Like, if those guys miss games, they are in huge trouble. The injury to Kemba Walker, the underwhelming kind of replacements for Gordon Hayward, the really shaky bench makes me really like the under on the Celtics team.
Yeah, when we were dealing with projections in the playoffs for the Celtics, it was very clear that the key 4 or 5 guys were going to have to play tons of minutes because they had no confidence in the bench. And the only guy that we had any confidence in projecting routinely minutes for was Brad Wanamaker.
Yes. And
he's the only piece of the bench that's gone. Everybody else is back. And it's amazing to see, I think Danny Ainge is an excellent GM, excellent front office member in general. But over the years, they've had this war chest of assets, and it has not resulted in depth on a team, which is unusual. And then this year they kind of got stuck in a weak draft with a lot of those picks kind of coming home to roost. And at the end of the day, they got Jason Tatum. They got that right in a big way. They got Jaylen Brown. They got that right in a big way. But they haven't put that war chest together to really support these guys in a meaningful way. And I think Brad Stevens does a great job getting a lot out of role players. But I really think these last few years, the Kyrie to Kemba, Gordon Hayward, these missteps are going to catch up because the asset abundance is no longer there.
Yeah, I think that's a problem that maybe, Presti and Oklahoma City are going to face down the line. You have so many first round picks. You don't know what to do. You need to combine them and, put them together for an actual stud, right? You need to consolidate them because at some point, Boston has all these first round picks. Where are you going to put them? They're going to go to Maine, play for the G League. Like, you're not have spots for these guys to really play and develop. So I think the only slight room for optimism is they created that $29 million trade exception in Gordon Hayward, but they are up against, I think, the tax apron, so they can't really use the entire amount. So there's a slight possibility. We saw the Warriors swing it for Oubre, that they can use that trade exception to bring in someone around the deadline like DeMar DeRozan,
Yeah.
Oladipo, Aaron Gordon, LaMarcus Aldridge, someone like that to kind of help with their depth and give them another body.
But those are just body. They're not even great roster fits.
Right.
Like LMA would be a terrible roster fit. Gordon would be a pretty weak roster fit on the whole. DeMar would be fine, but not ideal. I mean, there's a lot of one-on-one individual creation already on the roster, so it's going to be an interesting season for the Celtics, and they've got one of those higher win totals in general. I mean, they're a very successful team. People trust Brad Stevens to kind of figure it out. They're also a public team in terms of Boston being a very strong fan base. But I agree, 45 looks like a number that's a little bit elevated to me.
And that's one of the bigger gaps. If you look at Pelton's win projections, he's got them at 39, and they're at 45.5 at the Westgate right now. So you got some room there if Pelton's on it. And I'm sure it's just his motto, picking up how weak the bench is more than anything. So that's a good one to look at.
That's adjusted for the Kemba news too. So he factored that in as well.
All right, man. I see that you like the Chicago Bulls. To whisper sweet nothings into my ear about how good the Bulls are going to be this year.
Wait, come closer, Drew. I mean, can we
yes, I want to hear all the good Bulls things, because I'm just so happy. Like, I feel like I'm like on cloud nine that we're no longer in the Paxton Foreman era and no longer in the Jim Boylan era. Like, just it cannot be worse. It cannot be worse.
Cannot be worse, man. It cannot.
So I'm ready to talk overs. Let's hear it, Justin.
I mean, the Chicago Bulls, just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in. I had the over on this team last season, and they obviously disappointed. I really like the coaching change here from going to Billy Donovan, and we heard quotes just earlier today from the players. They're raving about how he's nothing like Boylan. He's not on their behinds like all the time. He's a player's coach. And while I might not want Billy Donovan coaching in high leverage situations deep in the playoffs, I want him coaching a team of young players and developing that talent. We saw what he did last season with Oklahoma City. I was really impressed by what he did, and I think he'll be able to do some really interesting things for this Bulls team. We've already seen quotes that they're going to abandon that blitz, off the pick and roll defense, and they're going to go to a drop coverage, which will be great for them, much better suited for that. One player in particular I'm super excited for is Wendell Carter Jr. I think he'll be much better utilized by Billy Donovan. I was really hoping that the Warriors could swing that deal and flip that Wiseman pick somehow for Wendell Carter. I'm still just a huge fan of his. Hopefully, Donovan can spark something out of Lauri Markkanen, who's really plateaued and hasn't really developed from his rookie season and up until last season. I think there were some quotes from Donovan comparing him to Gallinari, getting him more comfortable attacking the basket, and not kind of relegating to be a spot-up shooter. So I'm the talent's there. I'm very optimistic on this Bulls team. I think the pieces are there. I like the direction they're going with the coaching, with the front office, with Arturas. I can't wait to be let down again and just look back on this being, I'm such an idiot for following this for like the third straight year, but here I am.
Well, you also talked about continuity as one of the things that you're focused on in terms of this year with the short turnaround and less camp time and different things like that. And they really have the same roster. They just added to it with Patrick Williams. Maybe they get Otto Porter with a healthy year, which he's always been a very impactful player when he's been able to be healthy and on the floor. And that would change things dramatically just because they lacked a lot of wing depth last year. They really struggled to fill that three position. It was basically Chandler Hutchison for however long he was available to stay healthy. And then they had Satoransky trying to play the three a lot. And I think Satoransky's a pretty good player in terms of impact and on-court winning. And he's going to be the backup to Kobe White now. I'm pretty optimistic. I think Billy Donovan will definitely get the most out of this team just because I think they were beaten down. I mean, the Zach LaVine timeout clips that went around Twitter last year when Boylan was calling timeouts with 20 seconds left, down 20. And they've got, I think they've underperformed their talent levels for the last few years. And I think just getting somebody to get them to perform to their talent levels, I think gives a pretty good shot at this over on the whole. And then I think if you see any potential growth, I think the underutilization and the poor schemes for Wendell Carter Jr. were just a travesty. And Justin, I swear to God, when that draft night rumor was going around that they were going to trade Wendell Carter to get up, I was like, this is Mitch Trubisky all over again. I'm going to lose it. I'm going to absolutely embarrass myself on Twitter, just going nuts if this happens. Cause this is like the one bright spot that I have is believing in Wendell Carter Jr. I would have adored watching Wendell Carter Jr. play with Steph, and it would have been great to see him like do all the things that he can do. But as a Bulls fan, still, despite all of the trauma over the last few years, it would have killed me to see him go. Yeah, so I'm so glad that they didn't pull the trigger on that.
As a Warriors fan, I heard all these rumors about, potential targets for that number 2 pick. There are others that float around like Blake Griffin, LaMarcus Aldridge, but the Wendell Carter, that was the one that got me off my seat. That got me really excited. Yeah. Like, I think he's so much better than he's shown.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a combination of all of it. You had maybe the worst coaching in the league. You had some key injuries and really just poor play from everyone. So like Drew said, if you can get some of these guys just back to where they should be, and fingers crossed, maybe some of them can actually outperform what we're thinking, then yeah, I mean, then I think you have a playoff team in the East, and they're projected right now at 30.5 wins to be the 11th best team in the East. And I think there may be more in like, I hope at least they're in like the 7-8 range. So seems like a pretty good over. One of the ones that stuck out to me, Drew, that you picked was the Thunder under, and it seemed, it's a 22 total.
Yeah.
22.5 to be exact.
Yeah.
Usually when they're that low, I don't know. I feel a little nervous going under, but talk to me why you think under is the right move here.
Yeah, well, Justin and I both have teams on the low end that we're willing to go under on. So we'll let Justin talk about Detroit in a second. But with Oklahoma City, I look at their roster and I just don't think they're going to be able to be in many games in the Western Conference against really, really strong teams. And I think they're going to really prioritize development. And I think when you're prioritizing development, you do stuff, and not to say that they're like specifically tanking, because there's less incentive to do that now with the new lottery ball structure. But I don't think Pokusevski is going to make a huge impact this year. I think that's going to be like a developmental timeline thing. I think Shea, who I love, is great. I think Horford will look good in this system for a period of time, and then I think they'll move him. And I think this is just going to be a situation where I don't think they're going to be winning very many games at all. And they are, I mean, if Shea goes down, like, how are they ever scoring the ball offensively? They could average 87 points a night. I mean, it could be really tough.
Lou Dort, baby.
Yeah, it's going to be Lou Dort and Hamidou Diallo and Darius Baisley. And I like taking chances on all these guys in kind of seasonal drafts. And I will be playing some of these guys certainly in DFS, but from a win perspective, I think it's going to be a really tough go of it. And I think there's going to be an adjustment period for Shea too, with the amount of offensive attention or the amount of defensive attention he's going to be receiving with the amount of offensive responsibility he has. And I think that might hurt some of his impact stuff as well, because it's obviously going to make him less efficient. But also what you see often, it's the Bradley Beal scenario in Washington, right? Bradley Beal used to be a pretty decent defender. The last few years, though, when he's had to carry the entire team offensively, he's a total zero on the defensive end, because the dude has to get his rest because he's carrying every offensive possession. And I think some of that stuff that Shea is really impactful on the defensive end might also take a hit this year.
Yeah, so I think all their kind of vets are at higher risk of getting moved. So you mentioned Horford. I think Ariza's away from the team indefinitely.
He might not even sat out the bubble. Remember, yeah. So
he might not play at all. I mean, there's a chance he might not even play a single game for the Thunder, TBD. And then George Hill, I think, is another guy who is a candidate to get moved, at some point. So you kind of take those three out. Their bench is horrendous otherwise. Ty Jerome, Pokusevski, Mike Muscala, who's fine, not great. TJ Leaf, Schofield, it's not good. And then you have a bunch of role players in that starting lineup in Diallo and to an extent Lou Dort, who aren't adept at creating their own offense, or
Yeah.
So it'll be a grind. It'll be like second half of the season might just be SGA and whoever else,
I would like love if there was a book that would give me like a head to head on Knicks wins versus Thunder wins. Like I would feel so strongly on that. So strongly on that.
I do like Darius Bazley though. I think he's nice. He's a good piece. I was really impressed with how he played in the restart. So I didn't mean to disparage him by saying SGA and others. I think he's a nice player.
Yeah.
Yeah, Knicks, Thunder, and the Cavs are all tied for the lowest wins at 22.5.
Well, the Knicks showing some restraint, this offseason, not blowing their cap space, signing some smart, short-term 1-year deals. They'll have, a ton of flexibility next summer. So props to them for, put a banner up for that.
Didn't blow the cap.
Yeah,
didn't blow the cap 2020.
Didn't do anything dumb in the 2020 offseason. Congrats.
Yeah, I didn't love their offseason in terms of like who they invested in, but none of the deals are impactful in any way, shape, or form. I do think they're a little heavy on ball dominance, and that's just been a Knicks issue the last few years, like Alec Burks and Austin Rivers, and then getting to add on to Julius Randle. Like I think there were definitely different types of players, but I also believe that Tibbs is going to be a guy that's going to be maximizing win probability every single night. Like Tibbs does not like losing games, and so that's one of the reasons that I like the Knicks over. I also think the Eastern Conference, like it doesn't make sense to me that a bottom team in the East should be given a similar win total to a bottom team in the West. Like it just doesn't make much sense to me because the West is so much stronger in terms of depth and up top. So I think the Knicks as an over would be one of the bets that I target. But Justin, I teased it. I want to hear about your Pistons take.
I mean, it's basically what you said for the Thunder, and then just like switch some names around. Like it's like
but they tried this offseason though. They kind of tried with Jeremy Grant and Mason Plumlee. I don't know what they're doing.
I don't know what they're doing either.
They're basically like their whole roster is 6'5" or better. I guess that's the thing that they're doing. They're just taking tall guys.
I loved your those are the only fleets I've ever enjoyed. I think all the other fleets have been garbage mostly. So thanks for putting those out, those reactions to the Pistons signing. But yeah, with the Pistons, I'd be shocked if Derrick Rose finishes out the season in Detroit. He's just a really prime trade candidate. They're already going to start Killian Hayes from day one. Blake Griffin, a trade candidate as well. It just doesn't really make sense there if they can find a taker. And this season just going to be all about prioritizing their young development of the young players, from Killian Hayes to Isaiah Stewart, Sadiq Bey, Sekou Doumbouya, Svi, and another thing is they only keep their first round pick if they miss the playoffs. I think 17 through 30, it goes to Houston. So that's another incentive for them to not be good, to miss the playoffs. If they needed any more incentive. There's not a lot of meat left on the bone at 23.5, which, we talked about, and Wiggins alluded to earlier, but I believe in how bad this team could be. The potential of this team to be a sub 20 win team is high. I like it.
Justin believes in them. You can do it, Detroit. You can grab this under and figure it out.
One of the teams that Drew wanted to talk about, and Justin astutely pointed out, has already moved in that direction, was the 76ers. And I think they opened at 42.5 and now they're at 45.5. So I just wanted to point out that when you are making these bets, it's worth looking at the movement. And if something is moved big like that, 3 points, I'd be a little hesitant to take the over at that point because people already have smashed it in that direction. So I don't know, not a ton to mention there, but I thought it was a point worth making.
For sure. I would just say I think the 76ers offseason has been a big win for them in terms of freeing up the ways that they can play. And they're already talking about using Simmons, Embiid, pick and roll stuff, which is stuff that they just didn't do. They didn't really have the spacing to be able to do it. And now they should be able to have that with Seth Curry out there. And so I think the 76ers are moving in the right direction. And I think kind of a fresh coaching change is something that probably they were overdue for. So but yeah, going from 42.5 to 45.5, that number starts to get pretty full. The other team that's right around there that, Justin, before we get out of here, I wanted to get your take on, but the Nets, 46. is the number that I saw when I was pulling, and I was like, whoa. All right, we are full blown assuming that KD and Kyrie is like a smash combination without ever seeing it and not seeing these guys in a year. I was like, that is a big number.
Yeah, I mean this kind of hits like all the levers that I touched on earlier. So like KD hasn't played in almost 19 months. Kyrie hasn't played in 324 days. This is their first game action together. They've never played. They have 2 new star players that haven't played together. They have a new coach, a first-time coach, in Steve Nash. Try to put all those together in a shortened off season with a shortened build-up. It's just really hard for me to think about those guys just going out there and playing and playing well together, being familiar with each other, and there not being some growing pains. And not only just from a stylistic standpoint, just not being familiar with each other, not having played with each other, but also from an injury standpoint. Like KD's coming off a really devastating, probably the most devastating injury you can have as an NBA player. And
that's what I've heard from one of your work colleagues. I've heard that injury is just brutal to try to overcome.
Yeah. Bales has had a rough road back. From the injury. I don't know about Peter. I've never heard him talk about Achilles before. But yeah, KD coming off that injury, like hasn't played 19 months. Like there's going to be rust there for sure. I think their in-season health is a huge question mark. Just the ability for them to stay healthy and play 60 plus games, I think is a fairly big assumption. The only thing that you can, toss in there that we talked about earlier is a possible trade for James Harden. I think that would improve their outlook. Though at the same time, you throw Harden, Kyrie, and Kevin Durant together, it might be like that video that was going around on Twitter where each of them dribbles for 8 seconds and then Kyrie just launches it right before the shot clock expires. It literally might be that. I don't like. It's good on like if you're playing 2K, but when you put it together in season, you have 3 alphas like that together. Like it's hard for me to figure out how that's going to work just on the fly. So I think they seem like a really kind of public team where people are just, it's Brooklyn, it's KD and Kyrie. It's, they have all these championship aspirations, but I think the circumstances around this season with the shortened build-up really hurts them specifically.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely how they're going to play, just dribbling around. And if you remember back to when the Heat first got together, they struggled really bad out of the gate. So, when you have guys that are used to running the offense and having the ball all the time, and all of a sudden you have 3 of them together, I don't know. It could be problems. I like the under there as well. All right, we've gone pretty long here, Justin. Do you have any other teams you want to hit on or any closing thoughts?
Go Bulls.
Yes, sir. Drew, you got anything to close us out here?
No, big fan of Justin's work, so definitely want to be able to support that. The Fantasy Labs NBA Twitter newsfeed, if you are unaware somehow in playing NBA or DFS in any way, shape, or form, that is like the number one resource out there for NBA DFS stuff. So make sure to follow that. Justin, what other packages you got going on in terms of the betting stuff? I know you guys got stuff going on over at Action Network and Labs.
Yeah, Action Labs is our baby. We'll have the NBA Insiders product coming out soon. That's just basically my process from start to finish. Bets I'm watching, bets I'm placing, top props, all the news, all that stuff you'll need for betting. I just want to give a shout out to my guys, Jay and JJ, for helping me out with the Fantasy Labs NBA. If it wouldn't be possible without them, and I wanted to give you guys a shout out for having me on and continuing to do excellent work at ETR.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming. And then we also have Optimizer deal with Fantasy Labs. So we love Fantasy Labs over here, and we'll have more information about that available soon. But they just killed over there with all their tools and their NBA product. It's fantastic stuff. So yeah, Justin, thank you so much. I think Drew and I would have been lost a little bit without a sharp like you. We're just pretend sharp. So it was great to have you on to talk some ball. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. We will be back on, I can't even keep track what day it is. It's Monday. We'll be back on Wednesday. I believe we're talking sleepers and busts with Mike Gallagher. He's got pretty much all the content out now. I'm excited to dive into that over the podcast. So we will see you then. Good luck, everybody.